Good afternoon, baking students. Mrs. Pucell just wanted to do a little yeast experiment with you as we're moving on to our next unit with yeast. We have a little experiment here that we're going to take a look at. So I got all of the cups ready with the appropriate water temperature that we need to show the differences in yeast growth in our cups here. So I want to talk a little bit about yeast. If you have done quick breads already in your baking class, you should know what quick breads are. And quick breads rise with a quick acting leavening agent, which is usually in quick breads baking powder or baking soda. In yeast breads, though, yeast is our leavening agent, and that means when we put any leavening agent in our baked goods, whether it's a cake, cupcakes, brownies, cookies, that the leavener will make your product rise when it goes in the oven. Okay? So in this case, yeast is our leavening agent, and we want to see through this experiment which things affect yeast growth. And so particularly, we are going to look at two things here based on the different variations. We are looking at different water temperatures that affect yeast growth and also whether or not yeast needs food to grow. And in this case, we're using sugar, okay? So if you take a look, I am going to turn my screen down a little bit so you'll only see half of me, but you'll be able to see the cups a little bit better and also some of those different variations so you can see exactly what's in each measuring cup. I also use clear cups so that you could see the rise in the yeast foam after a few minutes. Okay, the longer you let it sit, the more it's going to rise. But in this case, in variation 1, we are going to just do yeast with warm water, about 110. The difference between variation 1 and variation 2 is variation 2 is also going to have 1 teaspoon of sugar. Variation 3 is going to have very hot water, okay? It also does still have the sugar, but the water is going to be about 160. And then variation 4 is going to have cold water, also with that 1 teaspoon of sugar, okay? So what we are going to do before the water temperatures change too much, I want to get the yeast in there. So I also am going to double check just so that we can verify the temperatures. Now, in the case of variation 1 and 2, it should be about 110, which is a warm temperature. And in this case, I don't know if you can see the thermometer or not, but it is reading 107.2. So is it 110? No, but it's close enough. You would drive yourself crazy trying to get to the exact degree. So it can vary slightly. Let's see, this one should also be around the same temperature, and this one also is, this one is a 106.9. Okay, actually now it's 107. So these two actually, although they're not 110, they are pretty much the same. So I'm going to add the yeast before the temperature changes too much. And then I also want to add my sugar to cup 2. Okay. And so I have my sugar right here. I am only adding it again in cup 2 because one of the differences I want to see between the first two is whether or not sugar affects yeast growth as well. So another thing you'll notice I'm using a whisk to dissolve the yeast in water. Okay, if I don't do this, sometimes it gets kind of clumpy. Okay, so I am stirring it up here. If you don't have a whisk, you can use a fork, but you do not have to do the experiment at home. Okay, we're just going to take a look at the experiment here to help you with some of the labs you may be doing at home with yeast. Okay, yeast is in your baking kit. All right, you can still see it. There are a few clumps here on the whisk, so that's why a spoon doesn't always work the best. Okay. All right, so now that I got those two, I do want to let those sit. So we have the warm water in both, this one without sugar, this one with sugar. So I am going to check my water on the last two here. This one should be warm. So right now it's reading, it's getting close to about 140. Okay, and I know on the tag there it says 160. So I can even put it in the microwave for a few seconds and come back to it. Now let's check the cold water here. Cold water should be about 60. And right now, this one's reading about 50. Okay. So it's just a little bit colder, but that will work. So let me put the yeast in, and this one also does have sugar. Okay. I'm going to whisk this one together, and then I am going to heat up that third variation just for a few seconds in the microwave. Okay, so there's that one. just a few seconds to heat it up a little bit more. All right, so as I had mentioned with the one that was 110, but it was only 107, that's okay if it's a little bit off, a little bit over, or a little bit under. So let's check what this one is at, and then I do have to add my yeast and my sugar. All right, so this one is getting close to about 145, which that will work perfectly because that is a big enough difference between the first two. Okay, so let me see where my other yeast is. Right here. I'm going to put the yeast in there, and I am going to put a little bit of sugar, 1 teaspoon. Okay, so the other thing to note is that the amount of water is the same in all the cups as well. They all started with half of a cup of water. Okay, so we use the same water. We also use the clear cup so that you could see the difference in the growth. All right, so I am going to let these sit. The experiment is usually just a couple minutes. Usually just in a few minutes you can see that growth. Okay, so we are going to come back and observe the results. In the meantime, you can be thinking in your head what you think might happen. Okay, what do you think will be the best temperature for yeast to grow? Do you think it's warm water, hot water, or cold water? And do you think something is necessary, okay, like sugar or salt, to activate and also contribute to that yeast growth? All right, so stay tuned for the result. All right, hi everyone, welcome back. We are going to take a look at each of our cups, and I am going to put them a little bit close together. So let's take a look at each. We'll look at all of them together, and then I'm going to remove the cards and put them a little bit closer because I know right now it might still be kind of hard to see. So we had variation 1 had the warm water and yeast. Variation 2 had the warm water, yeast, and sugar. Variation 3 had hot water, yeast, and sugar. And then variation 4 had cold water, yeast, and sugar. Okay, so now if we compare, these two were similar except for the sugar. So I'm going to take the cards and kind of move them all together. And you can see the difference in the foam growth here. Okay, so remember I started with the same amount of water. Okay, and I'll bring this a little bit closer. I started with the same amount of water. And you can see, or should be able to see, the variation 1 still has about a half a cup of water, and there's not too much foam. Okay, variation 2, look at this foam. Okay, so the water stops about there. So where you see the 1/3 a little bit down here, this is all yeast growth. Okay, so that's variation 1 and variation 2, and then we have the hot water and we have the cold water. So when we look at all of them together, okay, you should be able to see the difference, and I'll move so you can see better without me behind you, but you can see better the difference in the yeast growth between each cup. Okay, so right now you can have a discussion with your class, your teacher, as far as which had the most yeast growth and what factors contribute to that growth. Okay, so we should know the water temperature, and we should also know between variation 1 and variation 2 if sugar is also necessary to that growth. So what you want to keep in mind is when you are doing your lab at home with the yeast that is in your kit, we understand that you may not have a thermometer at home. So like I had mentioned in the beginning, you do not have to be exact with the degree that you are getting the water to. You just want to make sure that it's warm. So if it's too hot, where if you were to put your finger in it and it's almost burning you, that's too hot. Okay, you also should never have to put warm water and heat it up in the microwave. Okay, that would also be too hot. And if it is a little bit hot, like let's say you put your finger in it and you think it's hot, but your finger can still, stand the temperature that it's currently at. Remember, you can let it sit out a little bit, let it sit for a few minutes on your counter and cool down, and then you can add that yeast to it. Okay, so hopefully you learned a little bit based off of that experiment, and I'll leave you with the cups to look at. Okay, all right, hopefully you guys have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon.